The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Hospital hummed their familiar tune as I walked down the sterile corridor one last time. My footsteps echoed softly against the polished linoleum floor, each step taking me further away from the room where my husband David lay dying. 3 months. That's how long the doctors had given him when they first delivered the devastating news about his pancreatic cancer. 3 months had stretched into 6, and now, after countless rounds of chemotherapy, sleepless nights, and whispered prayers, we had reached the end of our journey together. I had just said goodbye to the man who had been my everything for 22 years. David's once strong hands, now thin and fragile, had held mine as we spoke our final words. His voice, barely above a whisper, had told me he loved me. He had made me promise to live fully after he was gone, to find happiness again someday. Weight of those promises sat heavy in my chest as I made my way toward the elevator. My purse strap dug into my shoulder, and I realized I was gripping it so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The familiar scent of disinfectant and the underlying smell of hospital food filled my nostrils, smells that had become as familiar to me as the perfume I used to wear to work every morning. Work. I had taken indefinite leave from my job as a librarian to care for David during these final months. The quiet halls of the public library seemed like a different world now, a place where my biggest worry used to be whether we had ordered enough copies of the latest bestseller. As I approached the nurse's station, I could hear the soft murmur of conversation. The evening shift was just beginning, and I recognized the voices of Sarah and Jennifer, 2 nurses who had become like family to us during David's stay. They had been so kind, so patient with all my questions and fears. I slowed my pace, not wanting to interrupt their conversation when something they said made me freeze completely. I still can't believe what happened with David Chun's test results. Sarah was saying in a low voice. My heart stopped. David's last name was Morrison, not Chun, but there was something about the way she said it that made me strain to listen. I know, Jennifer replied, her voice barely audible. When Dr. Peterson realized he'd been reading the wrong patient's scans for the past 2 weeks, I thought he was going to be sick right there in the hallway. The world seemed to tilt around me. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden behind a large potted plant that the hospital had placed near the elevator bank. David Morrison's latest scan actually showed significant improvement, Sarah continued. The tumor has shrunk by almost 60%. Dr. Peterson said if they adjust his treatment protocol now, he could have years left, not weeks. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees buckle, and I had to grab onto the plant's ceramic pot to steady myself. Years, not weeks, years. The poor man doesn't even know yet, Jennifer whispered. Dr. Peterson went home to figure out how to explain the mix-up. He'll tell him first thing tomorrow morning. Can you imagine? Sarah said his wife just said her final goodbyes. She thinks he's dying tonight. I couldn't breathe. The corridor seemed to spin around me, the fluorescent lights becoming streaks of white against my vision. David wasn't dying. At least, not now. Not tonight. Not for years, possibly. The mix-up was almost incomprehensible. Another patient, David Chen, had been the one with the terminal diagnosis. My David, my husband, who had spent the last 2 weeks preparing for death, writing letters to our children, recording videos for future grandchildren. He thought he'd never meet. He was going to live. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process what I had just learned. The tears that had been threatening to fall all evening finally came, but they were different now. They were tears of shock, of relief, of overwhelming confusion. What do you do when you've spent months preparing to lose the love of your life, only to discover it was all based on a terrible mistake? I turned around slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, but instead of stepping inside, I let them close again. I couldn't leave. Not now. Not with this knowledge burning inside me. I made my way back down the corridor, past the nurse's station where Sarah and Jennifer were now discussing other patients. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. When I reached David's room, I paused at the door. Through the small window, I could see him lying in the hospital bed, his eyes closed, his breathing steady but labored. The machines around him beeped softly, monitoring his vital signs just as they had for weeks. I pushed the door open gently. David's eyes fluttered open at the sound, and when he saw me, a weak smile crossed his face. "Emma," he whispered. "I thought you had left." "I did," I said, moving to his bedside and taking his hand in mine. "But I came back." "Why?" he asked, his voice filled with the kind of love that had sustained us through everything. I looked into his tired eyes, these eyes that had watched our children take their first steps, that had cried with me through miscarriages and celebrated with me through promotions and anniversaries. How do you tell someone that they're not dying when they've already made peace with it? "Because," I said, squeezing his hand gently, "I realize that whether we have days or decades left together, I want to spend every single moment right here with you." He squeezed my hand back, and I saw a tear slide down his cheek. "I love you, Emma Morrison," he whispered. "I love you too, David Morrison," I replied. "And tomorrow morning, Dr. Peterson is going to come in here with some news that's going to change everything." David looked confused, but I could see a tiny spark of hope flicker in his eyes. "What kind of news?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "The kind of news that means we get to grow old together after all." As I settled into the chair beside his bed, I thought about how sometimes life gives us gifts we never expected, wrapped in the most unlikely circumstances. Tomorrow would bring explanations and apologies, new treatment plans and renewed hope, but tonight, I simply held my husband's hand and watched him sleep, knowing that when morning came, we would begin the rest of our lives together all over again. Fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune, but somehow they sounded different now. They sounded like possibility,